How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from WeatherSpawn1000, and in this video we're going to focus on Invest 98L, which likely will become Tropical Storm Nicole in the very near future, and potentially Hurricane Nicole in the more long-term future, and determine if we could be in for one of those rare scenarios where a hurricane makes landfall in the United States during the month of November, where the computer models are depicting that there's a higher possibility that we're going to see a landfall somewhere in Florida as a hurricane with Invest 98L, and we could see hurricane impacts up all along the East Coast, including the Northeast Coast, in the very near future. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather economists. So take a look at what the National Hurricane Center is stating when it comes to the probability that Invest 98L develops. It's pretty much guaranteed at this point we're going to see at least Tropical Depression or Tropical Storm Nicole or Owen, depending on which of these two disturbances develops first. It's pretty much guaranteed at this point we're going to see at least some sort of tropical cyclone just to the east of Florida, and we do see that it's headed straight towards Florida. Now, I'd say at this point that direct impacts along the coast of Florida are likely, whether this is a tropical storm at landfall, or hurricane at landfall, or maybe just a regular low pressure system at landfall along the coast of Florida. Pretty much it's inevitable at this point. You will experience direct impacts. So if you're along the coast of Florida, you need to prepare now, regardless of how strong this storm will strengthen, because there's a high possibility of coastal flooding thanks to this pressure gradient between the big ridge that's just to the north of it and this low pressure system that will likely become tropical storm or Hurricane Nicole. Now take a look at the water vapor imagery. We do see that it isn't extremely well organized. Of course, we see the convection a little bit lopsided here, and we do see a lot of dry air on the southern portion of this storm, and this is as a result of an upper level high that exists just to the west of it that's steering a lot of that dry air into the center circulation, and there's still a decently strong level of upper level winds right now over this low pressure system. So as a result, it's having as of right now a more difficult time of strengthening, but it is likely to develop into a tropical depression or tropical storm within the next 48 hours. So we should begin to see the convergence consolidate a little bit, and the wind shear is expected to weaken within the next 24 to 48 hours once this upper level high pretty much moves over where the surface low is, and that will reduce the wind shear. And we have another upper level high that's coming off the United States southeast coast that's expected to move into the western Atlantic and definitely reduce the wind shear to a point where we will begin to see the convergence consolidate more around the center circulation, and we'll begin to see more convection occur on the southern side of this storm, which as of right now we aren't seeing that right around the surface low, but I do expect the convection to eventually wrap around to a point where we will likely see Tropical Storm Nicole or Tropical Storm Owen in the very near future. Now, let's take a look at what the computer models are saying, because this might be a pretty major event for not only Florida but the entire East Coast, because there's a possibility we could see a powerful tropical cyclone move up the East Coast. Now by that point, once it moves northward, it likely will weaken into an extra tropical cyclone, but the impacts will still be there regardless of whether it's a tropical cyclone or an extra tropical cyclone. So that's something to keep in mind up along the East Coast, even moving up towards the Northeast. Now let's take a look at what the GFS model is stating. So there aren't much differences compared to yesterday's run. The GFS model concerningly still wants to take a hurricane landfall somewhere right along the southern Florida coast, and we see the millibar pressure drop down to 973 millibars, which is equivalent to, I'd say, right around a category 2 to borderline a category 3, which is just extremely rare for the month of November to see a landfalling hurricane. To put that in perspective, the last time we saw a hurricane make landfall in the United States during the month of November was back in 1985, so 37 years ago now. But we could see that possibility of a hurricane landfall somewhere along the coast of Florida, which for many Floridians, that's the last thing you need, especially after Hurricane Ian just made landfall a little more than a month ago. So we do see quite a powerful hurricane make landfall. I'd say we see the landfall somewhere between West Palm Beach and Port St. Lucie, Florida. But this storm continues to move westward into the Gulf of Mexico, where it still maintains its strength. It's still at 982 millibar. It's still a 982 millibar low pressure system, and then if I were to continue to move forward, it will weaken as it moves over land, but we could see it re-intensify as it moves up the east coast because of baroclinic influences. Likely at this point, this will pretty much be well beyond an extratropical cyclone at this point, so it's going to be well past the point where it's a regular tropical cyclone. It's gonna attain some extratropical influences and baroclinic instability, which will make it a non-tropical entity by this point. But it's still a very powerful storm at this time with a millibar pressure of 982 millibars, which is so equivalent to a Category 1 hurricane just off the east coast, which is definitely something to keep in mind. We do the good news is that the GFS model wants to steer out to sea, but the thing is that with mid-latitude cyclones, the wind field is so large that you're still going to experience impacts and you're still going to experience gusty winds, even if you're well beyond the center of circulation, where New Jersey, the Delmar Peninsula, Pennsylvania, and of course New England could get involved with some strong winds. And of course that won't be the only threat. There's also going to be heavy rain associated with this. Let me actually zoom in a little bit to the western Atlantic. We do see that there is also going to be heavy rain associated with this as it moves up the east coast, which could create a major flash flood threat. Let me zoom into United States to really show you guys what's going to happen. So I'm going to show you guys a frozen precipitation as well, because another thing that's going to happen is that we're going to see a major snowstorm right around the Midwest, and this will converge with a very warm core tropical entity, which could make it very strong as it approaches the east coast. And while it's good news that the GFS model wants to take it offshore, there's still certainly uncertainty regarding the track forecast, and it really all depends on how far south this trough dips, because if this trough dips a little bit more, we're going to see more of a northerly wind associated with the jet stream that would steer the storm closer to the east coast rather than further eastward out to sea. Because the jet stream dip is so significant, we see more of a northerly wind component rather than a westerly wind component, which would steer this storm out to the east. But in this scenario, it seems like the GFS model wants to at least take a strong enough westerly wind, strong enough to where it'll stay a few hundred miles off at least the New Jersey, Long Island area, fairly close to Cape Cod. But there's still that possibility we could see this move up along the east coast, and even before it reaches the northeast, we still could experience impacts throughout the Carolinas, even well before it impacts you guys, because of course, like I've been saying over the past several days, we're gonna have this strong pressure gradient between this blocking ridge and this low pressure system, which will likely be tropical storm or Hurricane Nicole at this point, and that's gonna create a long fetch of wind that's gonna just push the water up along the Florida coast. So coastal flooding is likely, and unfortunately it's gonna come right at the worst timing where a king tide is nearby, which I think will only enhance the risk of coastal flooding along the Florida coast. And of course, this flooding isn't only exclusive to the Florida coast. We could see flooding up along the Carolinas as well, thanks to this long fetch of wind, even well before it reaches you guys. So it's definitely something to stay prepared for along the coast. If you live near if you live near the coast, especially around Florida, it might be best to evacuate, because there could be that possibility of very strong storm surge, especially if this does make landfall as strong as what the GFS model is depicting. Now, take a look at what the European model is saying. The European model is taking a little bit more of a better approach, definitely a more favorable approach when it comes to what we want to see, where we do see the European model isn't as lenient as strengthening this, where it makes landfall at around 998 millibars, which is still a tropical storm, but definitely not a hurricane, and this will definitely reduce the impacts. But like I said, regardless of whether this develops or not, you're still likely going to experience coastal flooding along coast, gusty winds prolonged for several days throughout Florida, and of course heavy rain will be associated with this because it will move quite slowly as it moves over Florida, thanks to the fighting of steering currents with this ridge and this big trough that's going to move through the Midwest. So that's something to keep in mind. What will really determine the strength of this storm is not the wind shear, because the wind shear is from both computer models. They're both agreeing that the wind shear is going to be relatively light. But what will be the key factor is how much dry air will entrain this storm. The European model is expecting a little bit more dry air to inhibit it from developing, which would certainly be the bear case scenario. But compare that to a GFS model, we see a lot more moisture around center circulation, and it's sort of in its own little bubble where the moisture is protecting it from the dry air that's just to the south, which is why the GFS model wants to strengthen this so rapidly close to category 3 hurricane, which is a huge surprise during the month of November. But really what will determine the strength of this storm will be the amount of dry air, because if I were to show you guys the upper level winds associated with this storm, you're going to see that the upper level winds are going to be relatively light as an upper level high moves into the western Atlantic. Taking a look at the upper level winds, we do see that while there is a decent amount of wind shear, we do have an upper level high located right here, an upper level high here, as well as an upper level low just to the north of it. But that will only increase the divergence of law for this storm to strengthen. So the wind shear we see will be relatively light for this to organize itself. So we just need to pay close attention to the amount of dry air that will entrain the center circulation to really determine how much this will strengthen over the next several days. But pretty much a tropical storm is inevitable at this time, and a landfall along Florida is inevitable, whether this is a tropical storm or a hurricane. And I think most likely we will at least see a tropical storm landfall along the coast of Florida. So you need to stay on high alert and take the right precautions. And the winds should start tomorrow for Florida, since it is going to have such a large wind field. So make sure to keep that in mind if you live all across Florida, especially along the coast. And then for the Northeast, we do see that let's actually take a look at what the European model is depicting when it comes to the track. The European model wants to take this low pressure system a little bit closer to the east coast, which would of course bring more impacts. And we do see the storm is quite strong. The upper level winds are quite strong, coming more from a northerly direction compared to the GFS model, which is more of a westerly direction. So as a result, we see the storm move a little bit more northward, and if the storm ends up stronger, the upper level winds will have more of an influence, so we'd see the storm move closer to the east coast. So definitely something to keep in mind throughout the east coast. But I'll keep you guys updated regarding any change with the forecast. But we could see major impacts when it comes to strong winds as well as heavy rainfall throughout the northeast, so make sure to pay very close attention to that. Now take a look at the sea surface temperatures. So some people are wondering if we'll see this develop despite the fact that it's November. Of course the temperatures are colder, but we do see that it's going to be over an area where the sea surface temperatures will be well above 80 degrees, so it won't be really much of a concern for this storm outside of maybe when it moves up the southeast coast, where we do see that just off the Carolinas that sea surface temperatures do fall below the 80-degree threshold. But at this point, this storm would strengthen more as a result of baroclinic influences rather than independently as a tropical entity. So it doesn't necessarily need the 80-degree temperatures once it reaches this far up north, because this trough moving through will produce enough instability to where it'll be able to strengthen without the need for latent heat associated with the ocean. So that's something to keep in mind, that this will likely strengthen despite as it moves up the northeast, despite the fact that sea surface temperatures will get colder. And take a look at what the ensemble members are stating. We do see that pretty much a vast majority of them take this somewhere, making landfall somewhere between West Palm Beach and Miami, Florida. And we do see this, we could see that possibility that this will move into the Gulf of Mexico. So in the areas hardest hit by Hurricane Ian, like Fort Myers, you could receive some rough surf on the backside of this and coastal flooding as a result of this storm moving into the Gulf of Mexico. And we see that it takes a sharp turn to the northwest. It's so uncertain how far close or how far this will move up along the coast. But I'll make sure to keep you guys updated. Really all depends on the position of this blocking ridge as well as its trough and how far south it dips influence the winds that will steer this storm to the north. Now, take a look at the model intensity guidance. We do see quite a few of them want to strengthen this to at least category 1 status. A few of them just think this will stay as a tropical storm, but pretty much all of them agree that this will be at least tropical storm status. But I think this being a hurricane is certainly I'd say more likely than not. While most of the model intensity guidance is stating otherwise, the model intensity guidance tends to underestimate the storm strength. So I think it's a little bit more likely we will see a hurricane make landfall, or at least be very close to the coast of Florida later during the week. Now, take a look at the wind forecast over the next several days for the coast of Florida. So taking a look at the winds right now, we see that the winds are fairly light, but we do see that the coast of Florida will experience those strong winds as early as tomorrow, where we do see that long fetch of wind because of this pressure gradient between Nicole as well as this ridge. And then we see the winds continue to increase dramatically by the Tuesday timeframe. By Wednesday, the storm is right at Florida's doorstep, and we see the winds strengthen quite a bit as a result. And we see this make landfall around Florida and still bring strong winds to the west coast of Florida. So in those especially impacted by Hurricane Ian, this might be another big issue you're going to need to contend with over the next several days. And we still see the winds throughout Florida by the Friday timeframe. So you're going to see very strong winds over a 4-day time period in Florida. So that will definitely take a toll on the trees. And we see the winds eventually move up the east coast, where now we do see the winds definitely get stronger as this continues to move up the northeast coast. But still uncertainty regarding the track. I'll keep you guys updated regarding that. And taking a look at the rainfall, that will be another issue to contend with over the next 5 days. We could see potentially up to 7 inches of rain in some portions of Florida, and we see a large area where you could receive 3 to 5 inches of rain, which will certainly cause flooding. And I definitely wouldn't be surprised that these forecasted totals increase for the East Coast once we approach a time period where it's around the 5-day mark. So make sure to keep that in mind. And here's my forecast when it comes to potential Hurricane Nicole. So I'm expecting this to strengthen into tropical storm by tomorrow at a 50. It should be right around 50 miles per hour by Tuesday. I'm expecting this to strengthen just gradually up to 60 miles per hour, and by Wednesday, near the point of landfall, I'm going to expect a Category 1 hurricane to make landfall somewhere along the coast of Florida. It seems like the wind shear will be light enough. It seems like I don't think there's going to be enough dry air to entrain the storm to really inhibit it, and the sea surface temperatures will be warm enough for this storm to have a pretty open area to organize itself. And of course, there's that possibility it could be even stronger if the GFS's model's depiction is correct, but it could also be weaker if the European model's depiction is correct. But I'm leaning more to the GFS models because it was initially correct when predicting that there will be a tropical storm, compared to the European model where it's been taking the weaker approach over the past several days. GFS model has been more correct up to this point, so I expect it to continue to be the slightly more reliable one when it comes to this storm. And then moving up northward, I'm expecting this to maintain strength at 60 miles per hour and then re-strengthen by the time it reaches the northeast as a result of barrel-clink influences close to hurricane status when it comes to wind. It'll definitely be an extratropical cyclone at this point, but the impacts will still be there. So there's at least something to keep in mind throughout the entirety of the East Coast, as I'll keep you guys updated for more updates over the coming days. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys have a great day.